Questions. Think back to the painting of your, perhaps, first mandala and how you experienced yourself while doing it. Look at yourself. Do you stay within the given structures and limits? Or do you tend to surpass them or revolt against the pattern? Do you allow yourself to make mistakes? Or do you get angry at yourself when you make them? Or do you look for somebody to turn against in your dissatisfaction? Do you like to start in the center, or from the outside, or somewhere else? Do you take your time, or do you hurry? What colors did you use? Do you like your work, or are you dissatisfied with it? Do you recognize yourself in it? Would you enjoy recognizing yourself in your own picture? Do you feel like going on, or was it already too much? Do you try to be totally conscious with yourself, and especially honest? After all, who besides yourself can you fool? Answers. As you might be anticipating already, the mandala can answer countless questions. Questions about you and God and the world. You can read everything in it once you have developed the viewpoint for it. If you read, it does not matter at all what interests you: the horoscope, the coffee grounds, the Ching, the hereditary substance, DNA, or a mandala. You only have to be able to do it. You will not be able to do it satisfactorily after this first mandala, but the more intensively you occupy yourself with mandalas, the more your ability to see and to define will grow. You will not at all be able to stop this process, and this activity in which intellect and intuition each play a part is neither good nor bad. After all, this is not what it is all about. It would be fun, of course, to see more than others, to look more successfully, but we shall be concerned with the real view into the essential, with the path, that, at the beginning, may seem less fun, may even appear to be difficult and burdensome. When we occupy ourselves with the mandala, we deal with a perfect form. If we really devote ourselves to this process, it will greatly affect our own perfection, even if the procedure is at first only an external one. We find something similar in the body exercise of the Hatha Yoga. They probably resulted from the fact that the bodies of developed people spontaneously took on these attitudes because they corresponded with the perfect inner attitude. Today's reverse path is not wrong. One takes on a perfect external attitude, asana, hoping that the corresponding inner attitude will grow in the same way. In fact, the perfection of the lotus posture alone helps to create for everyone a harmonization of body and soul. Therefore, when you occupy ourselves with a mandala, its perfect structure has similar effects on our own structure. The human being and the centers. The human body is built of cells, and those, in turn, are built of atoms. That means that our bodies are actually made up of innumerable atoms, but we can also understand our body as a mandala. With outstretched arms and legs, we form a 5-pointed star, and each star is a mandala. As a star mandala, each person has a clearly recognizable center, and we are all constantly in search of it. Sometimes we find it. The center, whether we feel it consciously or not, recognizes that mandala structure as something identical to its own nature. We perceive the conscious experience of our center as indescribable happiness. It is the goal of each meditation. After all, each meditation is a circling around the center and therefore a mandala, and each mandala is a recollection of its own center and thus a meditation. Origin of the mandala. To say something about the history of the mandala is difficult because history deals with time and the mandala exists, as its shape will teach us, essentially beyond time and space. The history of the mandala would have to begin, just like every proper history, with its origin, but that is unknown. The mandala cannot be fitted into time. Yes, it may be observed in time, but it always has the tendency to pull us into its center, where time and space come to an end. Of course, we can try to determine the occurrence of mandalas in time, A very early mandala might have been the impact of some meteor plunging into a primitive ocean. We must admit that the mandala is older than we are. Yes, it is as old as our world, as old as the creation. Don't the scientists tell us that everything started with a big bang? And isn't the picture of an explosion also a mandala? Stories of creation. In fact, scientists have verified that our universe has expanded more and more after the original explosion. It may be even more astonishing that for millennia this knowledge has been handed down through Hindu tradition. The creation is described as the breathing rhythm of Brahma. He inhales and exhales it. He lets it come into existence and disappear in a constant succession. Looking at the cyclical nature of this tradition, we can assume that the seers and rishis who composed the Vedas, the foundation of the Hindu religion, saw even further than our modern science, because everything in creation develops in cycles. Looking at other myths of creation, we find the same themes, only in other words, which should not particularly astonish us, since, despite the many languages, there is only one truth. In the Gospel of St. John it is written, "In the beginning was the Word." In the Indian language, it was a sound. Also, behind the word, a sound is hidden, and behind this, a mandala, because from the one center, the sound waves travel spherically, and the same picture is being created as when a stone is thrown into the water, but this time it is in space. In other myths, everything begins with the light. Now every spark, every light is also a mandala, its vibrations radiating in all directions from the one center. We also find the history of the creation depicted graphically and symbolically in many of the Gothic window rosettes. The architects of the Gothic period intentionally used the mandala because hardly any other symbol is better suited for portraying the cyclical character of the creation and the connection of transcendence in the center point and polarity in the periphery of the rose. A good example is the rose of the Cathedral of Lausanne. The next drawing shows a stony structure that is partially expressed in the lead frames of the windows. Pay attention, when painting, how all the forms of this mandala come into existence out of the center and how they maintain their relationship to this imaginary center. No matter how we twist and turn the creation, we do not find anything before the mandala. Rather, through the mandala, we do find something before the original explosion. Since this explosion, with its never-ending why, doesn't provide satisfactory answers to the scientific question, why was there suddenly an explosion? The researchers remain occupied with their scientific Zen koan. What existed first, the hen or the egg? As there is no logical solution for the Zen koan, so there is none for the scientific koan. The solution lies rather in the center of the mandala and is only accessible to the experience. Now try to draw the center points into the following circles and soap bubbles. The point of origin. It is not only difficult to determine a center point, it is impossible to depict a real point, because although all forms derive from the point itself has no form. According to definition, the point has no dimension relating to space, is not three-dimensional. It belongs to the realm of the ideas, not to the realm of form. We cannot perceive the point at all, just as we cannot see the pure white light. What we generally call point already goes beyond the idea. The little piece of graphite in the pencil, with which we draw the point, already has dimension relating to space, and thus is not a point anymore, but already rather a circle or even a globe. In this way, a globe develops from the point as soon as we provide it with space. If we also include time, we then have our creation, the world of Maya illusion. If we take space and time, the two deceivers, as the Indians call them, out of it again, then the whole world of illusion will give way and sink into the one original point. Again, we realize that the creation is only a mandala. If we continue to develop the point horizontally or vertically, we get a straight line, a distance. If we continue this straight line forever, finally we create a circle, the circle of the earth, a mandala, as we all know. The one center point, which materially does not even exist, is common to all mandalas of all times. In it, the contrasts reconcile. In it, the polarity is preserved. The point is the essence of each mandala, even though, in general, by the expression mandala, we mean just the opposite: the unessential, the changeable, the visible. After all, we make this mistake very often. For example, when we talk about a house, we visualize its walls and the roof, but we cannot and do not even want to enter those. In fact, we are talking about the space within the walls, but that one can neither build nor sell. Instead, one can be in it. Here, we have reached a crucial point. One cannot understand more about the mandala than the fact that the essential withdraws from the understanding, but that much one can understand. Understanding is tied to polarity, to space and time. Where those two end, also understanding ends, and that is exactly in the center of the mandalas. The external one can also understand, for on the outside the polarity is visibly portrayed. The Christian part of the rose windows often even deals with the portrayal of the creation, exactly the world of polarity. But in the center there is always a symbol of the unspeakable. For the Logos, or Godfather, or Christ, or in rare cases even the Tai Chi symbol. Each culture uses its own symbol of unity. On the following page, you see a silver piece made by the Iroquois Indians. Meditation. We now begin with a simple meditation exercise. Therefore, you don't need to know anything. Just sit down, upright, and in a comfortable position, and look at one of your colorful mandalas, which you have set up in front of you at eye level a short distance away. Now, you do not need to do anything else but look at the mandala, neither especially concentrating nor straining. Just look at it, focusing your eyes onto the whole mandala. Each time, when you realize that your thoughts are wandering away from what you see, just return your consciousness to the mandala center. You play this game for about 20 minutes. Wherever this meditation led you, whatever you experienced in it, it can only have been yourself or your creations that came to you. All experiences, thoughts, imaginations, dreams, and inner pictures do always reflect only ourselves. When you repeat such exercises often, in time your interest in your own creations and your own thoughts will diminish, and you will more and more get into the center, into your own and that of the mandala, because, after all, there is only the one. Homeland of the mandala. The word mandala is taken from the Sanskrit and is thus of Eastern origin. If one disregards for now that possibly the Brahmanistic tradition itself goes back to the Druidic origins. In the consciousness of most people, mandalas are something Eastern. As we can see in the Gothic rose windows, that didn't have to be so, because mandalas can be found at the roots of all cultures, since they lived in the roots of each human being. In each of us, the entire evolution of mankind continues, not least in the genetic code of our hereditary substance, which is the same for all living beings. After all, at the beginning of our life, we start again through the millennia of the development of the physical body. Even though, in a shorter time, we originate as unicellular creatures, in order to then swim as water creatures into the placenta, the fluid composition of which still corresponds to the primitive ocean. Later development contains a phase of crawling, similar to the reptiles, and finally the rising into standing position, which is as dramatic a step for each child as it probably was for mankind. Even as adults, we still carry with us traces of our origin, for example, in rudimentary body hairs. The development of language shows the same principle, as on the material level, we also carry in the soul the images and experiences from our long history. And thus, we do not need to be astonished that there are also images of unity, of the paradise that we once left. The pictures of unity are mandalas. Thus, it is clear that they have to be in all human beings, and this way also in all cultures, and are our common human spiritual heritage. Zenith for mandalas nadir for human beings. In our culture in modern times, C.G. Jung, in particular, worked at studying the mandala. He found out that mandalas appear essentially in situations of acute psychic chaos. For example, in cases of psychosis and acutely active neurosis. Possibly, these appearances indicate a self-healing tendency of the soul in the form of spontaneous inner images. If we think of the Crusades and the Inquisition, it is also evident that Gothic architecture, with its rose windows, developed during a time of greatest outside chaos. It certainly would not be astonishing if there were, besides healing attempts in the human being microcosm, also such endeavors of a culture or even the world macrocosm. According to the maxim of Hermes Trismegistus, as above, so below, as outside, so inside, there is an absolute conformity between micro and macrocosm. This may apply also to the growing interest in mandalas, which can be observed these days, and their increasing appearances in art and meditation exercises. Because once again, today we are living in a time which more and more loses itself in outward appearances and leaves the souls of human beings unsatisfied. This situation is revealed in the increasing one-sidedness of our values, which in turn has to do with the one-sidedness of our thinking. Obviously, we have our brain to think, and therefore we should be able to recognize this problem within ourselves. Looking at the brain from above, one is struck by at least three things. It forms a kind of mandala. It is reminiscent of a labyrinth. It is clearly divided into two parts and thus polar. Compare with Tai Chi signs. In the course of time, we have learned to find our way through the labyrinth of nerves of our brain. In doing so, we restricted ourselves almost exclusively to the one, namely the left, half, and through that we became one-sided. The left side is the one that thinks analytically and differentiates, that can read, write, and calculate, that on the whole dominates all functions of the intellect. In the body, it rules the right side, since the nerve streams cross in the spinal cord. The right brain hemisphere, in turn, is responsible for one's comprehension of the world as a whole, for all artistic things, for feelings and the sensation of colors, scents, and vibrations, and for the left side of the body. One associates with it the female, the moon-like. It corresponds with the dark yin, the negative, the magnetic, in contrast to the positive, electric, male, the light yang of the Tai Chi sign. The one-sided emphasis on the brain's left half is a phenomenon that is only found in our Western civilization. American Indian cultures, for example, and for the most part Eastern cultures as well, prefer the right half. The solution for the problem, left or right, you will certainly be able to find this for yourself after our trip into the world of mandalas. Yes, correct. It lies in the center. Turning again to the brain, we will find in its depth the Corpus Callosum, a structure that connects both brain halves. In this connecting structure, this center, lies the solution, i.e., to bring both halves into harmony, to experience them equally, and to let them become equally important. I am convinced that the condition of enlightenment expresses itself on this level in the harmony between the two polar brain halves. The overutilization of either side will always be unsatisfying. In order to come to this conclusion, we need not examine the physiology of the brain. We have only to look at our world today. The West is not happy with its half, nor the East with the other one. Also, attempts of people who cop out show us the same. It is not a solution when we Western, intellectually well-informed people now suddenly, out of the overwhelming certainty that it cannot go on so one-sidedly, try to go totally to the other pole and want to become hermits in India, or hobos, or gypsies. That is not ideal either. We can see this in the people who were on this path from the beginning because they were born in a particular environment and therefore had no choice. Not that the intellect is bad or even at fault, but there is more to life than intellect. The solution lies in the center between East and West, and North and South. Assistance in finding the center. In order to get to the center, to harmonize the two contrary brain halves, it makes sense to create an environment which stimulates both hemispheres at the same time. For that, we just have to look again at the traditions which meditation and religion have preserved, because for millennia they have intuitively used those scientific findings which our brain research produces today. As many cultic celebrations in West and East music plays an essential role and definitely has an effect on the right hemisphere, to stimulate the left one, for example, with intellectual sermons, does not make much sense, considering the dominance of the two brain halves in our circles. On the contrary, is it good to divert the brain to let it be active until it is tired, as for example will happen through the monotonous singing of mantras, but also through the reciting of the heart prayer of the Greek Orthodox religion or of our rosary? Furthermore, scents, perfume sticks, incense, and taste, cultic meals, stimulate the right hemisphere, but above all, rhythm, and each form of monotony, shifts the focal point into the direction of the center. Also, a sense of vision is important for the finding of one's own center. Thus, there are no figurative portrayals at all in Islamic mosques. Yes, it is strictly forbidden for the Muslims to depict Allah or even his prophet figuratively, and so they turn to ornamentation. But ornamentation in its monotony is definitely too boring for the left hemisphere, although its order and structure have more effect on the right hemisphere. Something similar is indicated in the second commandment in Exodus: "You shall not make for yourself a graven image." This warning of images has its meaning because images allow the left hemisphere to cling to the concrete, to judge and to value. But, nevertheless, the Christian religion, especially in Gothic structures, has sought concrete expression in the image world of symbols. After all, it is possible to sink oneself, in the truest sense of the word, into the symbol. In any case, when we transform rose windows into abstract, colorful mandalas, we do not need to mourn for the figurative depictions of the originals. Mandalas and figures, on different levels, express the same thing. Anyone who has been in a Gothic cathedral comes to understand that it is not the images that create the effect, they are much too small for that, sometimes not even recognizable from the ground, but the strange, almost magically working light shining through the windows and roses. Think about these things and pay a little attention to your personal environment when doing your painting meditations.